Tired of long waits and rushed care at the ER and urgent care clinic? Next time, stay home and let Dispatch Health bring the power of the hospital to you.
I call Dispatch Health. A care team of medical professionals actually come to your house.
They're the same caliber of people that you would see if you were at a hospital or an urgent care.
Dispatch Health can treat most non-life-threatening emergencies.
They can do the x-rays, they can do stitches,
urinary tract infections, blood test, urinalysis, ultrasound.
It's almost everything that they can do at the ER.
You never feel rushed. They're there for you and only you.
I felt like their only patient.
And it costs no more than a trip to urgent care because Dispatch Health is covered by most insurance, including Medicare. See if we serve your home at dispatchhealth.com.
Dispatch Health really went above and beyond.
It's wonderful to have care come to your home.
House calls are back, and they're better than ever. Learn more at dispatchhealth.com.
Hey, it's me, your Uncle Cooper. Sorry to interrupt your music. I do love music, especially when it's set at a reasonable volume. You know, music is really only as good as your speakers. The same is true for minivans. A minivan is only as good as the tires it sits on. And the button on the screen there, it agrees with me. If you click on it, it'll bring you to all the Cooper minivan tires that'll make your minivan a really good minivan. Go with the Coopers! Cooper!
Welcome to the AEW Match Guide podcast, where we deep dive into the best matches in AEW history. Brought to you by the Social Suplex Podcast Network and your host, Sam Brown. Yes, hello and welcome to the AEW Match Guide podcast. I'm your host, Sam Brown. Thank you for joining me. Every week, alongside a special guest, I take an in-depth look at one of the best matches in AEW history, taken from the definitive AEW Match Guide lists as voted by wrestling commentators from around the internet wrestling community. If you enjoy the show today, you can subscribe and rate it on your podcast app of choice, support the podcast financially on Red Circle, and make sure you check out all of the other great shows on the Social Suplex Podcast Network, such as One Nation Radio, Keeping It Strong Style, All Things Elite, and the Grave Consequences podcast that cover all aspects of the world of pro wrestling. My guest for today is one of the original guests on the show here. He is a writer for Pro Wrestling Musings and a video creator at ELO Wrestling on YouTube. It's Gareth, and we're looking at the Young Bucks versus Jon Moxley and Eddie Kingston for the AEW Tag Team titles at Double or Nothing 2021. How are you going today, Gareth?
I'm not too bad. Excited to get into this. One of my favourite matches in AEW, in wrestling history. One of my favourite matches ever. So very excited to talk it over. And yeah, I mean, we're speaking a little bit before this about revisiting this match. It was a lot of fun. And so I'm just in a good mood, a good place. One of the best places I've ever been in terms of wrestling was this match. And revisiting it was great. So yeah, all good, mate.
Yeah, I guess that kind of answers my next question, which was just going to be simply, why did you pick this match? It'll probably be no surprise to the listeners who know that I love Jon Moxley, who know that I've come to very much love the Young Bucks, and who know that I've come to love Eddie Kingston, that I am also a giant fan of this match. So I was very happy when you, very early in the piece, kind of called dibs on this one, and I'm glad we've finally got around to talking about it. So you said this is like the happiest you've been watching wrestling?
Yeah, no, just because, I mean, the match and the build up to this match, I really liked anyway, not just the feud itself, but the story between Eddie and Mox, and then the Young Bucks heel turn as well. All that kind of then fed into this. So that was great anyway, and the match was great anyway and stuff. But the fact that it was on the show with the first, full crowd back, and it just felt like wrestling was back at that point. And we've gone on to have everything that's happened since, which some people might argue is better. But it's one of those things where, like, in those moments, I took a moment to be like, this is I need to appreciate this now, because this is, I've been waiting for this for, I don't know how long had it been, like over a year. So yeah, it was like the happiest I've been watching wrestling, not just because of how great the match itself was, but like everything else that went around it, the world situation and stuff like that. And yeah, so that is why, like, when it came to this match, it's a match I hold very, very dear to my heart, much like Cody versus Dustin as well. Those two are matches which I think are like special, and I've got a weird little ownership over them where I'm like, so that's probably why I called dibs on this very early, because like, I want that one. Like, I don't want anyone else talking about that. That's my match. But yeah, no, it's like, it's a very, very special match to me. So that'll be why I picked it.
Yeah, well, I guess apologies that I didn't have you on for Dustin versus Cody as well.
Oh yeah, well, I can't have everything. Can't have everything.
Yes, yeah, that was a special one for my friend the Doc, and but as I said, I'm really excited to talk about this match as well. I'll just echo everything you've said. It's a bunch of wrestlers that I really love. It's a great build up that incorporates a lot of things I like about wrestling, and yeah, of course, Double or Nothing 2021. I've had a friend, Rich Latter, who's been on this podcast a number of times and is on the Social Suplex Podcast Network. He called it like he was there live, and he said it was like a religious experience. And, you know, I can't say it was, I'm a religious man. I can't say this was a religious experience, but it was certainly a massive high, an absolute rush of a show. And that adds a lot to this match as well. So let's get stuck into it. And as we always do here on the AEW Match Guide podcast, we will give the match its flowers. Dave Meltzer, Big Papa Dave, he gave it 5.75 of the big ones. The coward didn't give it 5. Cage match currently rated at 8.61. And when we did the first version of the definitive match guide list, this match came in 9th. So it is a match that is held in quite high regard critically by people in the community, and it's one that people remember very well. Of course, it is a match that sort of spirals off a number of different things. Of course, you have Kenny Omega and Jon Moxley in their championship feud that incorporated elements of the Elite. And you've also got Jon Moxley and Eddie Kingston, who came out of a big rivalry that they had in the lead up to Full Gear, finally reuniting at the end of that exploding barbed wire death match between Moxley and Omega. Gareth, I just want to get your opinions on, I guess, the things that set the table for this program between the Bucks and Moxley and Omega. What did you think of the Eddie Kingston and Jon Moxley stuff? And then also, what did you think of the Omega and Moxley stuff that happened directly afterwards?
It's the Moxley and Eddie Kingston story is one of my favorites in wrestling history. I'll probably say stuff like that a lot, like a lot of hyperbole or whatever, because like how much I love this and like everything that set it up, and then the match itself, and you know how I feel afterwards and stuff like that. I'll probably say stuff like that. Like, so if you think I'm going overboard, fair enough. But in terms of Eddie Kingston and Moxley, like I think with like wrestling storytelling and stuff, a lot of people get very caught up in, you know, week to week stuff or whatever. And with Eddie Kingston and Moxley, it was like they had their feud, they kind of went off, did their own things. But like the moment Eddie then came out to save Moxley, it would have been a lot better if the explosion hadn't been such a disaster. But
that's a given. That is an absolute, of course.
But they had built the tension so much in that match and leading up to that explosion at the end that it was like someone needs to come and do something. Who's going to come and do anything? And then the fact it was Eddie Kingston, someone that Mox had been feuding with and stuff, it was kind of like made no sense, but it also made the most sense because in that feud they had before, you knew they had the respect between them, and you know it was more about the title and like petty issues, but you knew like that history and that respect between them was there. So it wasn't like it was out of nowhere. But yeah, it was just one of those things. It's like what I really love about wrestling storytelling is the moments where it goes, oh, that makes sense. I didn't think of that, and stuff like that. And that was exactly what like Eddie coming to save Mox was. It wasn't like I knew this was coming and this is a story they built for months or whatever. It was that makes complete sense as a character to go and do something like that. And then obviously had their promo where they had to try and save the explosion on the Dynamite after, which was just like, it was very funny, but it was also it was a very good way of doing it. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, I want to see these guys together as a tag team. And as soon as they did that promo, I was sold. I was like, I want these guys as the tag team champions. So obviously then when we get down the line, it's kind of like we get there. I was very, 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 like, I've never wanted something so much in wrestling since Daniel Bryan winning at WrestleMania 30, probably. Like, that's how into this I was, and into like a specific result. Because a lot of the time I'm like, I'll just appreciate the story, whatever they do and stuff. I'll appreciate the art of it, enjoy it for what it is. But on this, I was like, I know I'm going to be really angry if the Young Bucks win, which again then allows me to move on to the Young Bucks heel turn and stuff like that. Their slow burn heel turn, which obviously culminated when they turned on Jon Moxley. That was really good as well. From more of a, it was, again, this was something where it's one of those examples of wrestling stories where they have built something and you knew something was coming. We all knew that was coming. But again, they kind of caught me off guard with when it exactly happened, because I didn't think it would happen in that way. I thought they'd do something different. I can't remember what, I probably had an idea of how it should have happened at the time, but I can't remember what that was. But I remember I didn't expect this to happen where it did until we were in the match. And then it was like, okay. And then when it happened, I was like, that makes sense. But that was an example of where it was kind of built over time and you knew it was coming. And there's nothing wrong with stuff like that. I just prefer those moments with like Eddie and Moxie, like, oh, right, that makes complete sense. And then you can move forward.
Yeah, one of the things that I love in wrestling, and you're right to give Eddie and Moxley and that sort of stuff praise. One of the things I love in wrestling is like complex character motives and value systems that they've got that kind of really flesh out who these people are, and you get a real idea of what their characters truly represent. And also I love shared universe storytelling, which is simply when, you know, different elements of the show sort of blend over into one another. And this is a mixture of all of those things. And that's one of the reasons I think just in general why I think 2021 was a really good year for AEW, is because with the Elite at the center, with, you know, Omega and the Bucks sort of united together, you did have a lot of the stories bleeding together because you had just this strong faction at the center of it. But with Moxley and Eddie, I love how the ending of their feud really informs their union, because in that feud, you've got Moxley sort of saying, I know who you are, Eddie, and I'm going to beat you until you remember who you are, and until you can remember to get over yourself, and get over this pride that you've built up and this chip on your shoulder that you've built up because I've been successful and you haven't. I'm still the same person, and I need you to be able to see that. And they have this really intense match, not just physically, which was very intense physically, but also emotionally for both men, because it's Eddie having to deal with the fact that he puts such immense pressure on himself by bringing his family into it, bringing the gods of his life in wrestling and trying to invoke them, and putting so much pressure on himself to do this and ultimately failing. But at the end, Moxley is showing him respect and wants to show him a sign of respect, and he can't take it at that moment, because of course he can't, because he can never take it in the moment. He'll never take those, like in a moment of loss, that is not Eddie Kingston to take that, and he storms off to the back, but he lets it sits with him, and he can, and he ultimately comes to terms with himself over time, and that's what some people need. And then of course, as you said, he rushes out at the end when there's no one left to save Jon Moxley, except for, I always think there's like a director's cut or something of the match with Sting and Darby Allin, with Darby and Sting like flooring it back to Daly's place to try and make it there and save Jon Moxley. But obviously he doesn't get there. Eddie is the last resort, you know, because Darby Allin's off in a warehouse, God knows where, in parts unknown. And he comes out and saves. And I love how they unite that. And obviously Eddie's got over the petty issues that he had, and he remembers the bond and the fellowship that they have. And, you know, something with Jon Moxley, just because of the way his character is, sometimes the best stories are just when, you know, someone just earns his respect, or like he unites with someone. You know, that was also the same in, you know, it was in the Shield with the Seth Rollins stuff, with, you know, when they finally reunited, it was such a big deal. And, you know, with the Wheeler Yuta thing that happened, you know, they're on different levels, but when Wheeler Yuta Jon Moxley's respect. It's one of the most, people love that match so much. It's done so well in the definitive match guide list for the second round, surprisingly, but it's just because people love it when Jon Moxley, gets a friend or earns someone's respect because of the way his character is and the way those two came together at the end. It's very organic. And as I said, it's a great example of complex characters and complex characterization. And as you said, it's actually on the Bucks side of things. It's actually the Bucks start their heel turn by beating up Jon Moxley. They had, for those of you who can't remember, there was a trios tag match where Jon Moxley was teaming with the Young Bucks against Kenny Omega and the Good Brothers. And there was sort of this, at the time, the Young Bucks weren't completely on board with Kenny and the Good Brothers. And there was this tense relationship, but they were like, we'll work together. But as the match wore on, they weren't willing to I guess go the whole hog and to completely take out Kenny Omega, which frustrated Moxley and of course led to the Bucks turning on Jon Moxley and solidifying their heel turn. They had a number of matches before they actually fought against Moxley and Kingston. They had one against Pac and Rey Fenix, one against the Sydal brothers, and a really good one against SCU, and also one against the Varsity Blondes. What did you think, I guess, of the heel turn? You said you liked the heel turn, but also, I guess, like the Young Bucks work up until the feud with Mox and Kingston.
Yeah, obviously there was that Varsity Blondes match, which was just kind of just there. It was fine. The Young Bucks did their heel shtick, and that, it was what it was. It was fine. It was, it was good enough. It was Rey Fenix and Pac, wasn't it?
Yep.
Yeah.
They went against just about every single iteration of Death Triangle, but that was the one they had before.
Yeah. And then obviously they eventually got to the Lucha Brothers properly. But yeah, that Rey Fenix and Pac match in kind of, I guess, the build to this pay-per-view, that was an unbelievable match. So good. And I remember they had the first half hour of Dynamite just doing that match, which was great. But the Young Bucks just being the biggest dickheads in that match was just fantastic. You obviously had the moment where they ripped off Rey Fenix's mask, which is just, it's a very classic Young Bucks thing to do when they face a luchador, or guess any kind of heel. They always go for the mask, don't they? But yeah, and that was the finish of the match, wasn't it? They just super kicked him after that. And yeah, that was a fantastic match and a really good insight into who they had become, well, not necessarily become, because they hadn't completely changed, but who they had kind of reverted to. And there's a great line in the package before the Mox Eddie match at the pay-per-view where Nick Jackson goes, we haven't changed, maybe our clothes maybe, but nothing else. It's there are aspects in which they hadn't changed, but obviously they just turned it up and just became even more insufferable, and then added in all the cheating and all the despicableness. But it was the match against SCU where it's that really obviously I know it's a work and stuff, but that actually worked me to some extent because I was just so annoyed, partially at AEW because they kind of screwed that final SCU run up, and that was annoying. But in that match, I was just I just hated them so much, and that really helped inform when we got to Eddie and Mox, me wanting them to win even more. And again, it wasn't that I was I don't know, since being a child, if a heel's ever actually worked me to that extent, because it wasn't that I was bored. I wasn't bored. And when I thought about it objectively, I was yeah, I've got no issue with them being tag team champions. They're amazing. And, they're very good at what they do as well. And I'm aware that I'm being worked. But when it came to the matches and stuff, I couldn't help but just really, really root against them. Especially in that SCU match. Obviously in the one against Pac and Phoenix as well. Yeah, Pac and Phoenix. And then obviously when it came to Eddie and Mox as well. So those three matches in particular were the ones I really felt that. Outside of it, those matches, I didn't feel it as much. But those three, especially the SCU one and the Eddie Mox one, those two are for me in terms of heel work, some of the best, especially in terms of tag team stuff. That's probably the best heel work I've ever seen in tag team wrestling. Because it literally did work me. So Yeah, the build and like the way that the Young Bucks title reign had gone, because they went from just having, they started off with a couple of kind of just fine matches, and then they started having better matches. They obviously had the one against MJF and Jericho as well, but it was kind of like, it felt like it was building. And I think obviously they lost the titles as well, so that was obviously a big crescendo moment. But I think it was building to this Eddie and Mox match, which was a massive crescendo, not just in terms of the crowd noise and everything like that, but the story of the Young Bucks' reign as well. This was, I think, the peak until they went and lost it, which people would say is probably the better match. I might disagree with that. I don't know.
Yeah. But yeah. One thing that the Young Bucks are really good at doing is finding the thing they can do that will be completely unforgivable. We talked about in the opener to this season, the match against Kenny and the Bucks, Kenny and Hangman. It's doing the golden trigger on Kenny Omega, and that completely turns the crowd's kind of split up to that point, and that completely turns the crowd against them. And in against luchadors, it's ripping the mask off. That's just something that they've incorporated. But, against SCU, it's the blood on the shoe. And one great thing that they did when they did turn heel was they ditched the tassels. They kind of repackaged themselves a little bit and updated their gear, and particularly they had the Jordans, and they've got these fancy new pants. Against SCU, like him getting pissed off at Daniels for bleeding on his shoe, it's just so unforgivable, because he's like more worried about his shoe that is absurdly expensive than this man that he's literally broken bread with bleeding on them. So it's they're really good at finding that that completely unforgivable thing. And I agree with you with the SCU match particularly. That was a brilliant match with a really emotive performance from both Kazarian and Daniels, as well as an unforgivable performance from the Bucks as well. And I love the repackaging. What did you, just quickly before we get into the direct build for this match, what did you think of the repackaging, the new outfits? Because the tassels, of course, were pretty iconic. That was a big part of their act, and the bandanas as well. What did you think of the flares and the Jordans and the kind of sleeping mask things they started wearing, or whatever they are?
I think they kind of just had an attitude of let's do like absolutely everything that's kind of insane. Like they obviously had the mustache era as well. And like they've done so many things like since turning heel, which is just like in terms of their gear and their presentation and stuff, which I think are just they're great because they're funny, but they also show like the character underneath and just how kind of far removed like from reality they are. And it just makes them, again, it just adds to it, makes them even more dislikable. And it's not like it's, you can be a great heel without changing your gear or anything. It's one of those things where it's like, it's one of those NXT things. It's like, I was a babyface, but now I'm a heel, so I'm going to wear black. It's like, okay, right, okay. So you just completely changed. And that was the thing with the Young Bucks.
But they're like, we're heels, so we're going to wear every single color of the rainbow.
yeah, exactly. But like that, the thing is like they had always been a bit like flamboyant and out there with like the things they would do anyway in terms of their gear and how they present. But they just they were at like an 8 and they turned it up to like an 11 and just went completely ridiculous with it. I can't remember how much of the absolute ridiculousness. Obviously, we had the Jordans and stuff, and that came in with the build as well, with like Eddie stealing the shoes as well, which is great. That was a great little touch. But I can't remember how ridiculous they went, because again, it all kind of bleeds into one. They had the mustaches, and like then they've had some ridiculous outfits. Like I'm just sat there like thinking, why has he worn this? Like every time the Young Bucks pop up on Dynamite, like Nick Jackson's done something. It's a new ridiculous
particularly their
thing.
Non-wrestling outfits, like the button-up shirts and stuff they wear are just insane. And they're very good at playing, even though I don't think they're in the ring what their detractors think they are, but they will present themselves as their detractors see them, and they are more than happy to lean into that 100,000 times. Like their on-screen presentation and characters are, as heels, are exactly what their detractors say they are, even more so, which is a nice twist on, I guess, how they present themselves and their characters, and it works really well because I guess there's such a discourse out there about them, and they just let that truth sort of sink into what they're doing without it, I think without it affecting their ability to be entertaining, particularly in the ring, as we're going to talk about. We do need to get into the actual build for this match.
Yeah.
We kind of have been getting into it because, as I said, this is a thing. This was a program that actually, was a great example of shared universe storytelling. They turned and complex characterization, because they initially turned when they were facing Mox, and that was sort of the end of Moxley's program with Omega, and he transitioned over to facing the Bucks. But when that did happen, Mox and Eddie united together as a team, started pulling like double and triple duty, wrestling on, like Dynamite, Dark Elevation. They probably would have done Rampage if Rampage was on at that point, just to get their win numbers up. And then they started directly targeting the Bucks. They destroyed their locker room. They rammed their bus with a truck. And later on, beat them up in post-match, and as you mentioned, stealing their shoes. It's pretty simple what they were doing, to get the Bucks' attention and get under their skin, but it was pretty effective stuff.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like, the way I thought about this at the time was kind of like, or maybe not exactly at the time, but like shortly afterwards, I remember thinking, like, people use the term sports entertainment and it doesn't actually mean anything. Like, it's just a thing that Vince made up and so that he could sell to advertisers easier. But like, what people have come to know sports entertainment to be, like the WWE style, kind of over the top characters and stuff like that. They mesh that so well with like traditional pro wrestling storytelling, because at the heart of this, there is like, there's that whole thing with Eddie and Mox, their story that came into that we've already spoken about. And they're kind of uniting in AEW, not reuniting in AEW, but reuniting from their time on the indies and stuff like that. Their relationship as, outside of AEW, it came on screen. And then you had like the Young Bucks heel turn, which is kind of just traditional pro wrestling storytelling, that you get heels and baby faces. And when we get into the match itself, which I'll talk about this later, but it is a very classic heel versus babyface dynamic. But like, also on top of all of that, like, you've got all the fundamentals, the basics, which actually make it good. But they also did those things like the stunts with like the trailer and stuff, which kind of just make it a bit more exciting. And I don't think there's anything wrong with sports entertainment. The issue with like a lot of WWE, let's say, for me anyway, is that they don't often back it up with those fundamentals. It's just kind of like, oh, let's do a stunt, like Braun Strowman stuff. It's just like, I'm going to flip cars for no reason. Like, whereas like when you had like Stone Cold back in the day or whatever, he did this ridiculous stuff, but there was those traditional kind of storytelling elements underlying everything. And that's why I really kind of loved this build, because it was like ridiculous and simple. And also the storytelling was fairly simple, but it kind of had these more complex stories bleeding into it, like you said. And that's why I loved it, because I think this is just like, I said at the time, and I got like a few, like, not abuse, but I got like people just like ramming at me for some reason. You know what Twitter can be like. Because I said, this is like, for me, like perfect pro wrestling storytelling. People are like, oh, it's not the best. I was like, well, no, it's not the best story necessarily. Like, there's other individual stories, like Hangman's arc, for example. I look back on that now, and like that for me is like the best. But I don't think that is like, it's not going to appeal to everyone. I think this is something which, if you watch this feud play out and you know all the context and stuff, and you don't enjoy it, I don't understand how you're a wrestling fan. Like, because it is just like perfect, I think, in every way. Because again, like I said, I'll just to sum up, they had that comedy, the kind of over the top stunts, over the top characters in the Young Bucks, and then like Eddie and Mox kind of went a little bit mental as well. Like, they kind of like turned it up to 11, but then everything underlying was there as well. So it was just great, I think.
Yeah, it's such a great contrast of characters as well, and they did that. They played that so well. You've got Mox and Eddie, who just do not give a shit about anything, like running their truck into this bus, and then you've got the Bucks and the rest of the Elite as well, who are just like these ridiculous prima donnas. And when they get in the ring, they're going to be able to turn it up and get it done, but they're not they're not street tough. Whereas Eddie and Mox, they're like, you know, they'll drink you under the table, and well, Mox not anymore, but they would at the time, and then they'll, you know, and then they'll get in a bar fight, and you know, and some of it was just, you know, just such rollicking good fun, and it was humorous and it was comedic. Like I remember this after they destroyed the bus, there was this segment where they're in a stretch Hummer or a stretch limo, and they're all like, all of the elite are packed in there. There's Kenny, there's the Good Brothers with their big danglies. Yeah, Don Callis is in there, and the Bucks are in there, and like Brandon Cutler like pops a champagne bottle or something, and everyone just freaks out thinking that Mox and Eddie are after them again. And it's hilarious. You know, with just how they just completely shit their pants. And, you know, and then you've got the great moment of, you know, like Eddie stealing shoes, these ridiculous Dior Jordans or whatever they've got that are, you know, worth thousands and thousands of dollars. And of course, Eddie steals them after they've laid them out. You know, just this street thug just does the most street thing ever. And the crowd love him for it, even though, you know, theoretically he's actually stealing the property of these ridiculous people who've spent a ridiculous amount of money. You know, it's like these people have these shoes on, they deserve to have them stolen because they cost so much and they spent so much on these shoes. It was I agree, it was just like a good time. And I get why, you know, like someone who loves the sport of pro wrestling might not be as engaged or have as much fun with this, but for me, you know, it's not trying to be Kenny versus Hangman or Kenny versus Okada, for example, or even it's not even trying to be like Moxley versus Omega. In terms of that was built up as like these two titans of pro wrestling, like clashing together, you know, at the peak of their powers. This is something a little bit more comedic and a little bit more fun, but you know, I like that about AEW, and I think that's something that the Young Bucks do very well, and obviously it's something that Mox and Eddie were able to play the straight men in a little bit as well. Yeah, for sure. No, like this is like, I guess if you're not a big fan of a lot of the stuff the Young Bucks do, I can understand like why, like, because that's not for you. Like there'll be people out there who don't like a comedy film I really like because they're more into other stuff, and for me, like, you know, that's fair. Like, I appreciate like lots of different styles of storytelling within wrestling and ways in which you can present it and stuff. And so I appreciate that. But like from like that classic pro wrestling, I guess kind of like this is probably like, you know, when people like arc back to the Attitude Era and they go, those are the good old days. I think these were the good old days, but like in just a modern context. Like you had, like I said, I've already summed it up, but you had everything there. You had the comedy and the stunts on top of that, and it was all there. Like that is what people missed. Maybe there weren't as many swear words or quite as much blood or whatever, but like besides that, like everything else is like exactly what people loved back then. And so if you're going for that style, let's say, I think they nailed it. Absolutely. Well, let's get into the match. We've talked about the build. We both loved it. And we're going to have a lot more positive things to say about the match. It was, of course, at Double or Nothing 2021 at Daly's Place. The return of crowds. It was the second match on the card. The third match that happened, so there was Riho versus Serena Deeb in the opener, which is actually a match that you and I talked about a number of months ago now. It was a long time ago now, but that's in the first season of the podcast, if you want to go listen to that. And then, of course, we had Hangman and Brian Cage open the show with a win to the Cowboy. And then Wild Thing hits and the crowd goes absolutely mental. And Mox and Eddie, they charge out. Mox is just so full of energy. He's like throwing chairs around, throwing his water bottle around. And as they hit the ring, you can see like this giant grin on Eddie's face. It's the first time he was in front of a full crowd in AEW. I'm not sure what his history like. Maybe this is the biggest crowd he's ever been in front of. I don't know 100%, but I'd say there's probably a good chance it was. And they are loving it. The crowd is rolling with them. A couple of things. Firstly, what a great moment in wrestling. Just the good time that this was, the energy, the vibe. And also, I've got a question for you about Wild Thing. This is probably the first time we've spoken about Moxley, and since he adopted Wild Thing as his theme, as his intro. What do you think about the song, and what did you think about this intro?
The song, like, when I first like heard it, like, I was like, I didn't know the history with I forget the guy's name, the Japanese actor. Yeah, so I didn't know the history about that initially, and obviously when they first used it, which I think was with Nagata, is that right?
And they played the original version of the song.
They used a different version, and I was fine. I thought it was an upgrade because, I don't know, when I look back now, because I've watched a couple of Jon Moxley's matches like recently, from like before when he had the old song. I don't know why I didn't like it, because, you know, it is good, and it does bring back good memories for me. But like at the time I was like, oh, they need to get a new song for Mox. So I was happy that they got a new song. But then it was when this happened, I was like, okay, I was wrong. This is a great song. I wasn't necessarily saying it was bad. I was just like, I don't really see the huge fuss, because a lot of people were like really, really excited by this. I was like, okay, I get that a legend used it, but it doesn't mean Moxley has to use it. And then I saw this and I was sold. I was like, oh yeah, when you add in the walking through the crowd and everything like that he can do, it's great, I think. And like the Wild Thing, just kind of it perfectly encapsulates what Moxley is. He is a wild thing. So those are kind of like my thoughts on like the song itself, like, and especially with time, like watching it happen with what do they call the match at Double or Nothing this year? The crazy one.
The Anarchy in the Arena.
That's it. Watching that with that song as well, that made me love it even more. So now I'm fully sold. I'm like, you can't take it away now. But yeah, no, this entrance for me, I think like it might be my favorite entrance ever. I can't really think of one that I loved anywhere near as much. So I guess, like, at least right now, I can't think of anything better. Maybe I'll have to have a think about that. But I think this is like, just for various reasons, again, because I was so happy whilst watching this show anyway. And then when the theme song hit and then they walk out, that was probably like the peak for me. That was like, yes, they're gonna win. I was like fully invested in it. So that helps as well. But I think just even objectively, like, the crowds are back. It's a great song. They're walking out. The crowd are going wild. They're going through the crowd, which always helps when, like, you know, because you kind of get to, I don't know, an entrance, like, some of them are really, really boring. And it's just like, okay, fair enough. Get to the ring. Get on with the match. But, like, it's something you can really make something out of, like a spectacle or whatever. Like, for example, someone will probably say Undertaker's WrestleMania whatever entrance is their favorite, and I can understand that because some of those were genuinely really chilling. And then maybe someone loves the John Cena ones because, you know, some of the WrestleMania entrances, they go really big. But for me, this, like, there was no they didn't go really big. It was just a great song, charging through the crowds, throwing those shoes all over the place. Moxley, like, left them, so he had to go back and get them. Like, so many things about it. Like, it felt like chaotic, and it was it set the tone for the match, I think, perfectly. And, like, I remember thinking, like, rewatching it, because I was like, I remember this entrance. I've watched the entrance loads of times since the match because it's just like such a great memory. But I remember thinking when I was rewatching it this time, I was like, I can't remember what the Bucks do, because surely they'd have to try and top it. And I think they probably just went like, we're not going to top it. We'll just come out and they do our thing and just be pricks, because we're not going to top that pop. They knew, like, people would go wild for it. So yeah, the entrance, and I think that really set the tone for the match, like I said, and it just kind of bleeds into it. I mean, the Young Bucks didn't even finish their entrance by the time the match started, so because they got attacked. But yeah, like, the entrances together, well, that entrance and then the end of the Young Bucks entrance really set the tone, and just it was just fantastic.
Yeah, couple of things that I'll say. Firstly, I'll never stop beating the drum. Wild Thing is perfect for Jon Moxley, and it has become perfect. But I'll never stop beating the drum for two songs. One, I Want to Be Your Dog by the Stooges, and two, Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap by AC/DC. That would be my picks, but Wild Thing is still perfect. It's also perfect, as well as those two songs would be. Other entrances that I've liked more, there's two I can think of off the top of my head. And that's pretty rare company, right? Like, actually three. One is actually Onita. He's actually going out to an exploding barbed wire death match this same version of Wild Thing is playing in the background, and as he's walking out, he's got a chair, and he puts the chair down in the middle of the entrance, sits down on it, and smokes a cigarette. Pulls out a cigarette and smokes it.
I've seen that.
So badass, incredible.
Yeah.
Another one would be Stone Cold on the way to the ring in WrestleMania 19. And what they do is the camera follows him, and you get a shot from the behind him the whole time as he walks to the ring. And I don't know, the way that it frames him and the rest of the arena is just so incredible to me. And I love that entrance. And then one in AEW that just always sticks out in my mind will be the Hangman Page when he teamed with the Dark Order against the Super Elite in a few months beyond this, and they had that big epic entrance with the remixed version of his song, which was very evocative. But I love this as well. Jon Moxley coming through the crowd. He's a man of the people, and as a viewer at home, you get to feel like you're part of this throng of people as you go through the crowd. He is a chaotic person in the ring, and you see that element of chaos because he's coming through the crowd. You know the crowd's kind of going nuts as he comes out, so it fits very well. And another thing I loved in this is there was no pause between the theme songs. They just and it added to the energy even, and the way the crowd turned, because Wild Thing was still playing, and then you just heard that opening guitar line from the Young Bucks theme, and it just, the crowd immediately turned. It felt like a rock concert. And as you said, streamers go off, and as the streamers go off, Mox and Eddie jump the Young Bucks, and we're immediately into like this violent, chaotic thing. Eddie's going after Nick in the ring. Mox is like stuffing streamers in Matt's mouth on the outside, and then choking him with his shirt. The pattern of the match is established. This is before the bell even goes, even though there's like all this chaos going on. The pattern of the match is actually established in the opening minutes, with Nick leaving Eddie. He kind of deals with Eddie, but leaves Eddie and goes to double team Mox with Matt. And that gets them the advantage over the solo guy before Eddie then kind of like comes and dives in. There's this wonderful shot of him running across the ring and diving to save Jon Moxley. What did you think of the start, and I guess how it sort of introduced that pattern of the match?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, like as soon as they didn't wait for the entrance to stop, they get into it, and I think that was great. Again, it just kept that energy high. People, like, this was just like one of those things, when people speak about like, oh, you're just doing things for like a crowd reaction or whatever, and you're doing spots or whatever. I feel like just high energy stuff. Obviously, you can't do it for like a full show; it just wouldn't work. And also, you do. I like the matches that kind of peak and then go down and then peak again. Like, I appreciate different things, but this was just like, it felt like, I can't remember how long the match is, but it's just like whatever, 20 minutes of whatever it is, and it's just like pure adrenaline. And over the course of it, like Eddie both of them just kind of get beaten down more and more and more. And like you said, it's very early in the match they kind of established that thing, like, and that's when you talk about like the psychology of it. I think of like the Young Bucks have come in thinking, right, these guys are going to brawl with us. We need to try and team up and pick them apart kind of systematically. Whereas like Mox and Eddie, there is no strategy. It's like we're going out there, we're going to just attack them. And that's exactly, you see that strategy within like the first couple of minutes. So that's great as well. Like, it's not necessarily even just a thing of just understanding the match psychology. It's just like the heels don't care about like, they just want to get out basically. There's a great moment. I don't think it's actually that early, but again, this whole match kind of just blurs into one. But there's a great moment where they hit the Meltzer driver on the outside, and Don Callis is like, that's fine, we'll win by count out. It's like they could have just brought him back into the ring and tried to win it, but they don't care. They genuinely just want to get out of there like as quick as they can, like, but they know they have to kind of go through this match. And Don Callis on commentary was great as well, because like Don Callis is so good as a heel commentator, because he'll put over like everything is going on, like he'll put over the baby faces and stuff with his fear that like something could happen. But then at the same time he's like acting like nothing could ever happen, and it's like a lot of commentators, like for example like WWE love to have a heel commentator. I remember Michael Cole back in the day would try and do that, but it was just so obvious. And I'm not, Michael Cole is a good commentator in ways, let's say, but I don't think that suited him. But Don Callis is just, in that aspect of commentary, he might be the best that I've ever seen, because like he's such a prick as well. Like if Jericho's commentary can ever get to that level, like, which I do think it can. Like I think obviously now he's still an on-screen character, so we won't get into the Jericho conversation. But like Jericho could become that basically, and it just takes a bit of like peeling yourself back and allowing yourself to look like a complete idiot, because that's what Don Callis does so well. So his commentary like really enhanced it as well for me. But yeah, they were just.
I love, just on Don Callis, I love how he sells the peril. They're his best moments. Like in the main event of this match, with Omega, Page, and Cassidy, there's this moment where it just goes shit, and it just like runs off. It's so good. It's so perfect. But I will say there are probably some Bobby Heenan and Jesse Ventura fans who are screaming at it right now for saying that Callis is better than those two. But
it's the best I've seen. I have seen them, but like I've not watched loads of that older stuff.
He is very good. So, yeah, for sure. And like I say, there's probably loads of great commentators in that aspect. But from what I've seen, like he does it really well. Let's just put it like that. Absolutely.
But yeah, no. Back to my original point. Like you kind of saw that strategy from the Young Bucks, and I mean the lack of strategy, I guess, from Eddie and Mox and stuff. And there was another point. I think it was relatively early as well. Mox is in the ring, and they're kind of double teaming him, and Eddie's there waiting for the tag, and like Jim Ross is screaming, "Come on, ref, get them out the ring. They're cheating, blah blah blah." And at first I thought, why doesn't Eddie just go in there and do something about it? Because that's kind of what he would do. But also then part of this story is that they are trying to beat them up and beat them and stuff, but also part of it is that like they are the good guys, and they know that they are, and they're trying to be more, even though like you've got the things of like stealing the shoes and stuff like that, they are still very aware that they are the good guys. And I don't know, there's like a pride within them where it's like, we're going to beat you without having to do that kind of thing. And that's because we dislike you for these reasons, so we're not going to stoop to those levels, even though it's counteracting their kind of. I don't know. I don't know whether I'm just making excuses for what is maybe potentially a bit of a plot hole within the match. Why doesn't Eddie just go in and beat them up? Or if that is actually a good point that I've made, and it's like, that is actually kind of the point to it. That's what I kind of viewed from it anyway. So I do want there was this wildness to them. There was also like a pride to it as well. But yeah, go ahead.
I do want to bring up the criticism of this match. I wanted to bring it up early because there is, at the time that this match happened, we both loved it, obviously, but there was a very heavy critique of this match by some people who really disliked the way, there was a lot of traditional back and forth, but this was a very, I guess, heel-dominated match. The Bucks managed to isolate, and they double-teamed Moxley and Eddie effectively, and that was the pattern of the match. And they were able to win by doing that. However, the critique of it was that the referee was giving them too much rope and allowing them to both be in the ring, taking, double teaming their opponent when there should have been only one person in it at any given time. And that the referee wasn't enforcing the rules as they should have. And for some people, they said that broke their immersion in the match. There should have been a disqualification or some more laying down of the rules. And they were saying, what is the point of having rules when you weren't? And Mox and Eddie weren't given that same rope. There is a moment actually where I think it's Moxley tries to get in to save Eddie, and Rick Knox gets in the road when, the Bucks have been in the ring with impunity for much of the match.
Yeah.
As I said, we're both fans of this match, but I did want to get your opinion on the criticism, and I guess why it doesn't necessarily pull you out of the match as it did some people who I think in good faith were giving a fair point on this match.
Yeah, I don't think that's an invalid criticism at all, because like I can completely understand it. One thing maybe if we're talking about the one thing they could have still had the match they had, but maybe improved that, is just have a moment where Rick Knox says, "You've got to get out of the ring now. I've given you too much, blah blah blah," and then they just go like, "We don't care." and then it's like, I'll disqualify you, and then you have like Eddie or Mox just go, don't you dare disqualify them, that's what they want. And then you kind of just justify everything that happens within it.
Yeah.
I can kind of like pretend that happened in my head because like, I want to like the match kind of thing. But like if they had actually gone and done that immediately, then those criticisms that are like kind of rubbish, because it's like they did address that point, and it's like the ref can't hold them to account because Eddie and Mox won't allow him to because they don't. And yeah, it's but also it's one of those things that I can kind of like with MJF. The refs know that he's going to do certain things, and they know the babyface is not going to be happy if they disqualify them. And like,
Hey, it's me, your Uncle Cooper. Sorry to interrupt your music. I do love music, especially when it's set at a reasonable volume. You know, music is really only as good as your speakers. The same is true for minivans. A minivan is only as good as the tires it sits on. And the button on the screen there, it agrees with me. If you click on it, it'll bring you to all the Cooper minivan tires that'll make your minivan a really good minivan. Go with the Coopers! Cooper!
Tired of long waits and rushed care at the ER and urgent care clinic? Next time, stay home and let Dispatch Health bring the power of the hospital to you.
I call Dispatch Health. A care team of medical professionals actually come to your house.
They're the same caliber of people that you would see if you were at a hospital or an urgent care.
Dispatch Health can treat most non-life-threatening emergencies.
They can do the x-rays, they can do stitches.
Urinary tract infections, blood test, urinalysis, ultrasound.
It's almost everything that they can do at the ER.
You never feel rushed. They're there for you and only you.
I felt like their only patient.
And it costs no more than a trip to urgent care because Dispatch Health is covered by most insurance, including Medicare. See if we serve your home at dispatchhealth.com.
Dispatch Health really went above and beyond.
It's wonderful to have care come to your home.
House calls are back, and they're better than ever. Learn more at dispatchhealth.com.
Excalibur sometimes, or Tony Schiavone sometimes points out, like, because Jim Ross often complains about this kind of thing, they'll often point out, like, we don't want this match ending in disqualification, so the referee's being very lenient. I agree with what he's doing, but, you know, he needs to get more control. Maybe they say something like that. I can't remember exactly if they said anything like that throughout this match specifically, but I know I've heard that before. So there's also, like, a thing when it comes to AEW tag team matches that I kind of just accept that the refs are going to be very lenient. So again, like I'm not saying everyone necessarily has to do that, because I do understand the criticism, and I do think, like, if they had done a moment where the Bucks are like, I don't care, we don't care, disqualify us, go ahead, it would have only enhanced it, because then it's like, oh, you really see, like, these guys just want to get out of it. They really don't care, and they're doing everything in their power. Like, they're willing to just cheat, because if they get disqualified, who cares, you know? But yeah, and I like the fact that they don't obviously go to the extent of, like, and again, some people might say this is a bit of a plot hole, because if they really didn't care that much, they would just hit him with the chair and then let the ref see it. But then, I don't know, even if they did that, maybe the ref would just, again, it comes back to that thing of maybe the ref sees what they're trying to do and goes, and then the partner goes, don't you dare disqualify. So there's so many, like, different Irish whips are a plot hole. There's so many plot holes and little things where it's like you could pick holes in matches, like, within wrestling, because it isn't real. So yeah, I understand that criticism, and I do think it's fair, but it didn't break my immersion, because I can make up excuses and reasons for what happened, because this is how AEW do their tag team wrestling, you know. And so that's just why, for me personally.
Yeah. The reason I wanted to bring it up is because that is something that people say a lot, and sometimes I think it's not fair. Sometimes I think they're just being pedantic because they don't necessarily like the Young Bucks, or they don't like AEW. Yeah. But in this case, I saw it from people who, like, I know are good faith critique, like they have good faith critiques, and for them they were saying that, and that was something that they legitimately felt. For me, the reason it didn't work, I never thought about it from your perspective with the, like, I guess the meta, the elements of the story where the Young Bucks actually want to get disqualified, and they don't care if they get disqualified because they just want to escape the beating. I kind of just see this match as almost the most pure distillation I've ever seen of a team versus two individuals. You know, Eddie and Jon Moxley. Jon Moxley is the most protected singles wrestler in AEW, and Eddie Kingston is a top singles act. Even at this point, where I think he's come a long way in, you know, the year or so since this this match as a singles act. But even at this point, he is a top singles act, and in any combination of this in singles, you know, Moxley versus Matt or Nick, or Eddie versus Matt or Nick, they will have their way quite comfortably with Matt or Nick. But because Matt and Nick are a team, they are able to work better together, more cohesively than these two individuals who, even though they do have a bond, an emotional, and they're on like an emotional and a bond of friendship, I guess, they aren't on the same page as an act necessarily, and they aren't as fluent together as an act. And the Young Bucks together are able to split up and overcome these two, I guess, individuals who they wouldn't be able to overcome otherwise because they work together. And that's kind of the pattern of this match. That's the psychology of this match. And that's kind of the story of this match that they're telling, that, you know, together the Young Bucks are unstoppable, because they're able to beat the most, you know, the most dominant person in this company, the most dominant single star in this company. Together they are able to take him out, where even Kenny Omega wasn't able to do it by himself. And because that's the story of the match, this thing with disqualifications, it didn't matter to me. Like, that's why that's, I guess, why it doesn't matter to me. But I do think it's a fair critique of this match in some ways, but for me, it just didn't happen. And obviously, as I said, it was a thing that divided people, and, you know, there was lots of people on either side. So, let's move on from that. And let's get into some of the more fun things. I wanted to talk about, like, some of the fun character things in this match, because this is four guys who are just so completely dialed into the characters that they're playing and that they're wrestling as. You know, there's a number of different like things that they do, little interactions they have. I think my favorite is either the Bucks doing their Shield parody. Which, you know, actually causes Moxley to psych up. They, you know, do a fake Shield powerbomb. But I think my favorite is Matt gets onto the face side, because of course they, you know, only recently turned heel, and you've got this brilliant thing in Darby's place where they've had face and heel sides, I guess, not just of the entrance tunnel, but where they stand in the match, and Matt goes over to the face side, tags himself in, cheers Eddie on, and then does like this Hulk Hogan-esque like power up and power slam gesture. It's just brilliantly prickish, and the crowd just completely boo him and just absolutely hate it. But as I said, like, these guys do things that are completely unforgivable. They do things that are like they're prima donnas, they're showmen, and they do things that are unpredictable. And for me, that was it in this match. What about yourself? What are sort of the character moments that you just love in this match?
I literally picked out that one as one of the ones I'd had to speak about, because like it's a hilarious moment. And like you said, like, the Young Bucks know how to get those little moments, and they know their audience so well. They know, like, who can we kind of rib on? And, like, obviously we can rib on the Shield because of Mox and stuff like that. But, like, Hulk Hogan is that, like, we're talking about, like, the sports entertainment elements earlier. Hulk Hogan is, like, the epitome of that kind of, you know, that thing. And it's also great as well because they said about Mox, you're the guy from over there, the other place, like, you're from that place. Eddie, you know, like, that was the thing they kind of tried to use to kind of, I guess, I don't know if they were trying to use it to, like, split them up, or whether it was just a snide jab, but it was like trying to be like, you guys couldn't be more different, trying to like play into like their kind of rivalry they had just months earlier. So then to like bring out Hulk Hogan in the actual match, along with that fake tag kind of spot that they do quite often as heels, but like to then add that Hulk Hogan thing on top of it was just like cherry on the cake. For me, like what you were saying earlier about like the team versus individuals is like, obviously that's spot on. That was like the story of the match. But like within that, like, you had these really, really great hot tags. Eddie had one and Mox had one. Moxley came in and he'd throw in like lariats and all sorts all over the place.
He just like ragdolls them around when he gets his tag.
Suplexes, and then he
throwing them.
Yeah, and then he hits like a pile driver on both of them and goes to the pin on one of them. But like that was just like, again, I was speaking earlier about like this was like Wild Thing was the perfect song to set this up, because this match was just like wild kind of throughout. Even in those moments where the Young Bucks were being more calculated and stuff, it was still kind of like very high offense. And even though it was like it was a very obvious they come in with a plan, the others were kind of the more wild ones. Mox and Eddie were the more wild ones. It was still wild to an extent, just because like that was just the atmosphere. And within that, it just had so many moments where like different characters poked out. So we mentioned like the Matt Jackson one. Moxley had his moment. Eddie had multiple moments throughout, which I really, really liked. Like there were moments where he physically couldn't do anything to stop them because he'd been like so beat, his leg had been so beat up, which is another thing about this match. Like I remember like at the time,
was just quickly, because you did mention before, like why didn't Eddie or Mox jump in? Like they successfully sold on the outside enough that like they couldn't jump in for each other necessarily. And Eddie's leg was a big part of that, but go on. Yeah, no, exactly. But there were like, and there were moments from Mox as well, like you said, like where he was on the outside and like, and those were moments that like really, really, I was already behind these guys. I was just getting more and more and more invested as the match went on throughout those moments. And then, but I think my favorite match, or my favorite moment of the match, is Eddie Kingston's hot tag, because that comes after so much of this kind of build up of like they'd been beaten down on Mox so much to that point. Eddie had been struggling with his leg on the outside, and anytime he got in to try and do anything, they just kicked his leg, or they went on the outside and just like put him back down again. It was like, again, he kind of felt powerless, and I was like, oh, they're going to do a thing where they just completely isolate Mox, blah, blah, blah. And Eddie's, but then this kind of hot tag comes out of nowhere, which obviously they had been building to, but as a fan watching at in the moment, I was just like, it was genuine, just like relief, like, yes, they're going to do it now. And that's exactly what they want. That's exactly what they want to bring out of me as a fan. And again, it was just like, it's just suplexes, like hitting them all over the place, like it was just wild. Like there's no real like incredible spot to it, but like the moment itself was kind of the spot, I guess. And that is just like, again, that I would be surprised if I've ever watched a moment of wrestling where I was happier than I was in that moment when Eddie Kingston had that hot tag, just because it was just like it had been built to. And then when it came in, it was just like electric. And they all four of these guys sell so well for this match. And I think that's what makes this match so good. You know, like Mox and Eddie, their struggle, they're selling as they're getting beaten down by these two like little, it's like two little mosquitoes, just like pick. And eventually they just get like taken down by them. But then, like, the way Matt and Nick just, like, ragdoll themselves around when Mox gets his tag in, when Eddie gets in. There's even, like, this moment where I think Eddie's got Matt in a stretch plum and Nick punches him in the face and just completely no-sells it. Just absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Now, you kind of said it there, like, that you thought they might change it mid-match. I came into this match thinking, this is the most obvious result ever. The Bucks are clearly going to beat these guys. This is just like happening because it'll be a fun match. But for me, the moment was when Eddie, like Gallows and Anderson show up. You know they're going to show up at some point.
Yeah.
They do. Eddie like just dives off the apron at Gallows. And then Frankie Kazarian comes out of nowhere, gets giant monster pop and takes out Anderson on the stage. And then you've got Mox and Matt alone in the ring. And, of course, as we said, this match has been all about the Bucks being able to successfully take down Mox and Eddie by double teaming. And now it's a singles match between Matt Jackson, and who is a very good wrestler, but against Jon Moxley. And at that moment, the crowd is just going mental. They're at a fever pitch when Frankie shows up. And I was just thinking, they're going to switch the title here. They're just going to do it. Or they're going to call it in the ring because it just makes so much sense to do it at this point. You got swept up like me, didn't you?
Yeah, for sure. Like, I went into this match genuinely not sure. I know you said, like, it was predictable or whatever, but I genuinely wasn't sure, and it was probably because I was getting too much into the romanticism of like what I really wanted to happen versus maybe what the company.
That's a great place to be, though, isn't it?
I know. I wish I could be like that for everything. But yeah, like I just got completely swept up with it. Like again, the moment Mox and Eddie came together, as I said earlier in that promo after Revolution. I was like, I want these guys as the tag team champions. And I want them to I want them to have a great run. And then I started actually seeing them have matches and stuff. And I loved their little finisher, which they created, which they used quite early in this match, which I think was a good way to get a little. Yeah. It was a great way to kind of because that's such a great move. It needed to be in the match, but maybe, I don't know, it could have been a really, really great near fall. But it's whatever. And they had a couple of matches on Dynamite, which were maybe a little bit quicker and stuff. But I was just like, these are so fun, and imagine these, but a little bit longer and stuff. And both guys are so good as well. And I had a little dream that we could get Mox and Eddie versus FTR or something like that. And I thought that would have been great in many ways, in similar ways to this match, like the team versus two individuals. I think when we're talking about a tag team who really show themselves as the best team unit, I think FTR are the best at doing that, because they don't necessarily get in the ring and do everything. It's those quick tags and stuff like that, and isolating their opponent. If they had Eddie in the corner there and they're beating down him, and that Mox is there on the thing waiting, but FTR aren't breaking any rules. They could do a face versus face match. They could do that now really, really well. I would love to see. Anyway, I had all these little dreams going on in my head, and I think I just got swept up by them ultimately, which again is the best place to be as a fan. But yeah, going into it, I was like, the Young Bucks probably will win, but I was probably 70-30. So I was like, they probably will win, but I'm gonna have my fun. And if I thought at the time, if AEW are being smart, they'll have Mox and Eddie win. And, because it didn't happen, I can still pretend that I was right. Even though, everything we got afterwards with the Young Bucks was so fantastic. So, and, yeah. But Mox and Eddie, having that tactic, it's still one of my dreams that I want to happen at some point. But, yeah, it was just one of those things where, in the match then, it convinced me. I went from 70-30... Young Bucks, I was to 50-50, and then that same moment you spoke about, I was probably 70-30 the other way. They're going to do it. And yeah, these are the matches you want to book, because regardless of the outcome, you can't really say, if you're looking at it objectively from the perspective of the company booking or whatever, it's either one you probably could have gone with and it would have been great. So you couldn't really argue with either outcome. But you want one where, and this is where it really, really where I really think they did well. It's it was that babyface versus heel dynamic, which I think was it was so perfect. Like you said earlier, the way these two they kind of they clash with each other perfectly. And then you've got two guys who are both so likable as individuals, and then a team unit, which in tag team wrestling, the heels being the dominant force, and the kind of more of the unit, whereas the babyfaces tend to be more kind of go off the energy of the crowd, or maybe it's for example, if it's Top Flight, they'll go off their kind of exciting aerial athleticism. For Mox and Eddie, it's just their brawling nature, I guess. It's a completely different style, but it's exciting for a different reason. But it was if you wrote a textbook of how to do babyface versus heel dynamics in tag team wrestling, this would probably be it for me. Just because the Young Bucks especially were so good at making you hate them and want them to lose, and they delivered enough moments where it was you thought, oh, could it even earlier in the match, with Moxie's first hot tag, I was like, okay. And again, that's me getting swept up, and maybe someone who wasn't as invested maybe didn't think that much. that much. But yeah, for me, like when it comes to that dynamic that they had between them, it goes back to those things that I was speaking about earlier. It's those fundamentals, which they just had. Like any great wrestling story is going to have, any great wrestling match is going to have, and you'll have like the exciting moments, the spots and stuff on top of it. But like the things that make the really, really great matches are when you've got a really, really great dynamic, and that is what they had, like better than any. So, and I think when you've got that, and you've got the genuine possibility that they could go this way, they could have this team win or that wrestler win. When you have those things, it's a recipe for success, and it's really, really hard to fail. It's just so hard to actually just pick that up out of nowhere. Like you need the audience to be fully invested, and you need them to believe that anything could happen. And if they don't believe, you need to make them believe within the match, as they did with you, for example. So
and I think I'm not the only one like that, because the crowd, they're going absolutely mental. And I always say, like, the bad faith critique of the Young Bucks is that they're spot monkeys, that they, you know, rely on cheap, you know, just their little spots, their moves. But for me, the secret sauce for the Young Bucks, their secret recipe and their superpower is their ability to pace and structure a match in a way that it hits a crescendo. And when this hits the crescendo with, as we said, like Frankie coming in and making that, giving Mox the chance, that's when they get into the final stretch. And that's brilliant, because that's when the crowd is at its peak. And so, of course, that's when they're hitting their ending. Mox gets Matt in a rear naked choke, but has to let it go because Nick comes in. There's, you know, a lot of near misses on finishes at this point. At one point, Mox and Eddie go for the violent crown. But as Mox goes to the outside, he gets pulled off. And then in turn, Nick and Matt go for the Meltzer driver, and this time Nick is the one that's pulled off on the outside. A little bit later, Moxley is going back and forth with Nick Jackson, and there's this brilliant moment where he gets him just up for the paradigm shift, and Nick Jackson flips out of it. It's a brilliant reversal, like a absolutely brilliant last gasp reversal from Nick Jackson, and then Nick actually gets hit by it properly, and Matt has to dive in and interrupt it. And then in the end, Eddie gets taken out. They go like mental on Mox. Mox is like trying valiantly to take them all on at once, but they're just doing a series of super kicks at him. He's getting fired up, but at the same time getting beaten down. And then they hit him with 4 consecutive BTE triggers. They don't even go for pins in between it, because they know that this, like, they sell the toughness of Jon Moxley and how hard they have to hit him to keep him down. They hit 4 consecutive BTE triggers, and the Bucks can finally pin him and get the victory. What did you think of that ending stretch, Gareth?
Yeah, just before you say that, you said something about the Young Bucks was like the spot monkey criticism, and I wanted to address this because this match is like the perfect match to show someone who thinks that, because there aren't really like there are spots in it, obviously, like as there are in any match, but it's like they clearly feel not
completely organic.
Yeah, and they're clearly not done just to pop the audience, although like there are a lot of things. The things that pop the audience in this match are the kind of like
everything.
The hot tags. Well, yeah, everything. But the main things, like the peaks, like the hot tags, and like you said, that moment where you thought, okay, they've cleared out the Good Brothers, and Nick's not in there. It's just Mox and Matt, and like again, that's when the crowd really rise to their feet. I remember like there are a couple of moments actually where you just see the crowd just stand up, like you see them because they're like, oh crap, something's gonna happen here, and it's like it's not that something happened in terms of a spot. It's that they're so invested. So yeah, this isn't the only match you can show them, but I think it probably is the best example of it, because like even in the steel cage match, for example, there are loads of different spots in that which a bad faith critic would point at and be like, oh, they're just spot monkeys or whatever. In this match, I don't think there's not many, if there's any. Like there's the Meltzer driver to the outside, but that's just their finisher, really. Like it's not really like it's not. And like they're not having to.
The difference is, like, I guess the thing with this match is there's at no point are they like searching around to make sure they're in the right right part of the ring to do their spot. Everything flows so perfectly. So when they do go for these moments that are obviously they've worked out in advance, when they do go for them, it feels organic, and it doesn't. There's never a moment where they're like looking around or they're obviously moving so that they're in the right place to hit, what they need to do. They're just always there automatically because it's just flowing organically. Yeah, exactly. I just wanted to address that just because it was like, this is just a perfect match to show for that. But in regards to the finish, I love the finish so much. I remember like thinking on rewatching it, because you've got Eddie kind of just there like on the outside, kind of helpless, and it kind of reminds me of Titanic when Jack drowns, because it's like he just can't do anything. He has to go. Like, he could just get on, and they could, but I don't know, maybe it's a lot easier when you're freezing in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. But it kind of just reminded me of a moment like that. It's like proper, like, those are the spots, if we're going to talk about spots, those are the spots that I really get invested in, and I really love personally. It's like, if you're comparing it to like movies and stuff, like a great action scene or a great quote from like in a movie, those are great, but like it's those moments that really kind of like hit you. Because for me, when I saw them hit the BTE trigger and then they hit it again, and Eddie's just there on the outside like laying out, it was like I came like off this massive high to this like complete dump, but in a good way, like in a way of like, I wasn't depressed. I was just like, really, it's like when your sports team, the roller coaster's finished.
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of like it's just like, okay. it's more just like I went through all the stages of grief in about 2 seconds and just reached acceptance. Or not necessarily 2 seconds. Within that, throughout that, actually, yeah, this is a good analogy, because throughout that, those final, they did the super kicks and then they had the BT triggers and stuff. It was kind of like denial. Like, I knew this was the end, but I was like denying it. And then slowly I went through different things. And then when they hit the final one and went for the cover, I was like in my head, there was probably a split second where I was like still rejecting it. Like, he's going to kick out at one. And then when he did kick out at one, it was acceptance, because like if he was going to kick out, it would have been at one. And they already did that spot anyway. So yeah. But no, for me, like, it's one of my, I'm going to sound like a broken record, and I'm going to be hyperbolic again, but it's one of my favorite finishes to a match ever. Because it helps when you're just invested. I get, for someone who maybe wasn't as invested, they may not feel the same way I did. But for me, it was just like, if you're going to have a match where the heel wins, this is exactly the feeling you want the audience to have. And that's exactly how I felt. Like I said, it's like a film with like a sad ending. It's like, that's how I felt afterwards.
You talk about like I just love the exclamation point that the 4 BTE triggers is on the end of this. It's not enough that they've got to do it once or even twice, and they don't even try. It's not even like try once and forget the pinfall. They're just so, I guess, they know how intensely they've had to fight, how dangerous Jon Moxley is, and they're like, we have to end this now, and we're going to absolutely obliterate this guy as hard as we possibly can, and that's by doing it over this move that has put everyone else out. We're going to have to do it 4 times on him, and it makes Moxley look like an absolute monster that they have to do that to him, and it puts those guys, it makes them look smart for just deciding that that's what they had to do, smart and ruthless. Even though they are these like flamboyant pricks who were, jumping at the side, just Cutler popping a champagne bottle in the build to this, and getting prissy about these multi-$1,000 shoes that they've had stolen off them. In the end, they are ruthless in the way that they're able to get the job done. And I love the exclamation point on the end of this match. Yeah, I think the ending is fantastic. It's just overall, as I said, like a really great story, and just the most pure distillation of a team beating up, like being able to be stronger than two individuals that I've personally ever seen in wrestling. There's probably, a match in the 80s where Hogan and Savage, get beaten. Actually, no, they never would have lost to whoever the tag team champions were in WWE, WWF at the time. But I don't know, this was just such a pure story of that, and I loved how dedicated it was to that psychology, and I loved how perfectly they were able to pull it off. Yeah, for sure. It reminds me of what you're saying there about they had to do something, they had to go above and beyond. It kind of reminds me, we spoke about Brody Lee versus Jon Moxley as well. That's probably a finish I like a little bit more than this one. Just because obviously you have the spot where they go through the stage and then he comes in, hits the paradigm shift, and then eventually he has to do the bulldog choke, and Brody just kind of just can't fight anymore basically. So that's I think Moxley tends to be very good at these. The one with Wheeler Yuta as well. He's very good at putting people over and then but eventually beating them anyway. So I guess he knew exactly how to have that done to him. Yeah. And obviously the Bucks are very good at it as well. The one with Eddie Kingston, funnily enough, is another great example of that. Him telling Eddie that it's over while he's strangling him out with barbed wire. Yeah, Moxley is I think he really understands that finishes and stuff. New Japan are very good at finishes, but from an action perspective, sometimes they have some really good kind of emotional finishes as well. But I think Moxley really does he really understands that the finish is the end of the story. And sometimes I watch a match and the finish is the end of the match. And I think that's one thing that really separates Mox, especially in these big matches, is where he really shines. Is he's probably one of the better wrestlers at doing a finish, which really kind of, I always feel like I've been through something and I felt something after a Mox match, which sometimes with Okada matches, as great as some of them can be, it's just Rainmaker and done, or ending sequence Rainmaker and done. And I don't really feel anything more than that. And I think Mox just has a way. And again, it's not saying obviously that makes him a better. I don't want to get into that discussion, or that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to. This is where Mox, I think, really, really is fantastic. And this match was an example of that. Brody was, Eddie was, like you said. There was one with Darby as well. There's countless. Even the Brian Cage, Taz has to throw the towel in. Yeah. I'm thinking the Lance Archer finishes, how that's kind of continued to go above, and even when he lost. Yeah, that's a great call. And I'm just thinking about it now. He always finishes his promos with a killer final line. Yeah, he knows how to leave you. Man, I'd never thought about that before, but you're right. He knows how to put an exclamation mark on something. So, yeah, great call there. I guess moving into the legacy portion of the show, where we talk about the legacy of the match and how it holds up historically. Obviously both of us massive fans of this, but we'll have to get our less subjective hat on and maybe try and be a bit more objective on this thing. When we did the original match guide list, this is the first match guide list we did. This one came in 10th. Actually, I think I said 9th earlier. It actually came in 10th. It came in 10th. That's ahead of a lot of very well-regarded matches. But in terms of tag matches, it was behind, of course, Kenny Omega and Adam Page versus the Young Bucks. Also behind the Young Bucks and Lucha Bros, their ladder match, and behind the FTR versus the Young Bucks, which came in at 9th. But ahead of a number of well-remembered and well-thought-of matches as well, particularly singles matches. This was actually Eddie Kingston's highest-rated match and Jon Moxley's second highest-rated match in the original the first edition of the match guide. Do you think 10th is a little bit high. Does it hold up? Did recency bias play a part in the ranking of this so highly? Of course, we did the original list straight after Double or Nothing 2021. So was recency bias a factor? Do you think, like, historically this match has aged as well as, say, something like Moxley versus Brody Lee, or Cody versus Chris Jericho from Full Gear 2019, just pulling, two of them out that are close in that 15 to 10 area?
Yeah, it's interesting because when you told me it was ninth, and then I looked at it and I saw that it was 10th, and I was like, I'm not going to bother correcting you, but yeah. But when I saw that it was 10th, I was a little bit surprised just because I wasn't sure whether, like, again, I would have had it in the top 10. For me, I think it's the second best tag match that AEW have had. For the reasons we've gone over in this podcast, and it's not just because it was like at a good time and stuff, but also, like, I think, like, if you strip the context of the show it was on and, like, the crowd and stuff, it was still a really, really well worked match. And for me, like, I'll get invested in those matches more than ones like, I don't want to call it like Best Friends versus Proud and Powerful. That's in its 7th. I don't want to call it a spot fest because it's not. But it's much more just action heavy. The build to that was atrocious, I think. Like, there's only things, but then it was like this explosion at the end, which was just fantastic. That's like an action movie to me. Moxley and Kingston versus the Young Bucks is like something, I don't know what genre I'd compare it to, but I got really invested in it, like genuinely invested. And again, subjectively, I would have it much higher. Even objectively, I would have it higher. I think you could make an argument with the Young Bucks versus the Lucha Bros just because it had a lot of the things that this match had within that as well. I just preferred the one with Moxley and Kingston personally. But like, I think when I've done, like, I can't remember how I've like ranked it when I submitted my thing, but like, that's where I sit today. But I am very close on them, so I've probably flip flopped on that. And like, they're both fantastic, basically. But getting to the actual point. I am surprised it was that high, but I don't think it's out of place, if you get what I mean. I'm surprised because it doesn't seem to get talked about that much. It doesn't get talked about as much as Cody versus Brody Lee, Omega versus Moxley, although that one's the Revolution one. Moxley versus Brody Lee as well is one that I could make an argument that could be higher. Like, but I think another one of the issues with this list, and why it's not with the list, but with like when you're deciding the list, is it's so hard because all of these matches are so good that it's like hard.
What's your problem with my list, Gareth?
But the good thing about the list is that it kind of gives you a consensus from a lot of different people and kind of gives you somewhere where you can rank them. Subjectively, you could shift things around, but like, I think what I'm going to say is I don't think the list lies. There might have been a bit of recency bias within it, as there are a couple of, there's 3 Double or Nothing matches. One of them's Cody versus Dustin. So there's 2 in the top 10. So yeah, I don't know. Like it's maybe there is some recency bias there, but I'm here a year later, and I think I like it even more than I did at the time. Like, looking back, it's one of the fondest things. And again, maybe a lot of that is subjective, and it's hard for me to like remove my subjectivity in this because it's a match I feel so strongly about. So maybe I am being not as objective as I would like to be, or whatever, as I should be, whatever. But like, Kenny Omega versus Pac is above it, and as great as that match was, I don't think there's any. I wouldn't enjoy that match going back and watching it anywhere near as much. I don't think there's anything anywhere near as much as you can invest in. The technical wrestling is a lot better. There's better spots in that one if you want to talk about like spot fest and stuff like that. And I love Pac and I love Kenny, so like that was one of my favorite matches AEW's ever done. But I think when I've revisited matches and stuff, I revisited Kenny Omega versus Jon Moxley as well. I did that with what's his name?
Joey Doherty.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So I did that on his podcast, which is all about Jon Moxley. You should go check that out if you haven't. If you like Jon Moxley. Have you been on that? Surely, yeah.
Twice.
Yeah.
Yes. I was on the first episode.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. But like, for example, I went and revisited that. I enjoyed revisiting this match a lot more than I did that one. Not because it was bad at all, But so for me, I'm going to argue it should be higher. And that's just me being, being biased. The list doesn't lie, is what I'd say. The list doesn't lie.
Yeah. Look,
I think it stands up.
I would say, just quickly, and you may be surprised by this, and we can talk about this afterwards, maybe offline, but I don't actually like Kenny Omega versus Jon Moxley from Full Gear 2019. That's a match I really don't like, even though it's, my two favorite wrestlers pretty much of all time at this point. But look, I'm not going to disagree with you that the list doesn't lie, because it's my list and it absolutely never lies. It absolutely tells the whole truth. What I'd say about this match, like historically, and I don't think it's talked about as much, I think it's a real high point for the Young Bucks' reign. For me, it's my favorite match of their reign. I think most people would probably say the Lucha Brothers match at All Out was their favorite. I think one thing I'm finding with like thinking about things historically is a lot of the time, particularly the matches that like have a long lasting impact are the ones where there's like a substantial change in the characters. And the ones that are kind of like remembered the most will often have like a change in the characters or the division or like some sort of big universe changing event or wrestling changing event that can like people can hang their hat on. And this didn't really have something like that. It was a massive high point, of course, but it didn't really have anything like that. After this, the Young Bucks kind of just went along. Their characters remained the same, and they went along and they continued to dominate the division as they had in the lead up to it. And Jon Moxley and Eddie Kingston kind of went and continued on their merry way, not necessarily tag teaming together all the time, but, maintaining an alliance and continuing to be, just generally awesome, a generally awesome act. But, for neither of these acts did this really have like a long-lasting impact on their presentation or their trajectory in the company, which I think is probably why it doesn't necessarily. I think if we took the same matches that ranked in the first list and re-ranked them, I don't think this would end up as high as it did for that reason, just because I don't think people remember it quite as much for that reason. That's just my take. As I said, I guess trying to read other people's motives and thoughts and the historic, I guess, analysis and remembrance of great matches and why something that obviously, as we said, like Meltzer gave this 4.75 on Cage Match. It's, in the high 8s and it did really well in the list. So, it's not just us that have the guys that, voted in this original list, like the 30 people or so that have that opinion. I had that opinion at the time, but I'm just trying to, put my finger on what, where I feel like this match is historically and why it is that way.
I think just quickly to jump in on that, that's definitely a fair point. And like if you did it now, for example, obviously you've been asking for the last year's ones, but if you did all-time AEW again, this would probably rank somewhere maybe top 20, top 25.
Oh, I don't think it'd get that high, honestly. I think it'd be in the 30s.
Maybe. Yeah. But I don't know. Like I think like when you speak to people about this, or when it comes up in, like on Twitter or whatever, people will have like very, very fond memories of it, and that's what I think. Like it's one of those matches which I think like maybe in like 10 years will be even more like, because people will have like that nostalgia around that, and it was a great time, and people will remember that, and they won't even necessarily remember the match, because like when I think of like matches from like, unless I go back and rewatch them, I'll be like, oh, the nostalgia of that match. Then when I go back and watch it, it was maybe I've actually just like it's aged better in my mind because of time, and then when I actually go back and watch it. But I think it's the thing, like when Hangman and Bryan Danielson had their draw, I was among various people saying like, oh, draw wasn't the right result, and as it played out, I think it made for a great story that built into a second great match. And I would probably always take, or would I? I don't know. A lot of people would take 2 4.75 matches over one 5-star match. I think if Hangman just wins it there at the end, I think that not in a weird contrived way of like, the final 3 seconds and he's just got the count just in time. Not like that, but in the last minute where it's like we've got a minute left, and then there's a rush and he manages to hit it and win. I think that is a perfect match. And I think if Moxley and Eddie win here, I think it is a perfect match, and I think people put this top 5. And it's one of those things where it's like the winner of something, or like you said, whether there's a historic moment surrounding it, those will like skew people's minds just because it jumps out easier and you think it like that. For example, the Lucha Bros versus Young Bucks, I don't think it's much better, if at all better than this match. I think there's a conversation to be had, but because that's where the change happened and stuff, and the Lucha Brothers, everyone loves the Lucha Brothers, it's where a huge moment happened for them. It's naturally people are just going to think of that higher just because a bigger thing happened around it. So there is like one of those things. But yeah, in terms of like, would people vote it higher? They probably wouldn't. But for me, where I think it actually, when you actually go back and rewatch it, I think it's one of the matches which really stands up in terms of like the actual art of what they're doing. Really stands up better than quite a few of the ones ranked above it in the list. And again, people will vote for things for different reasons, but for me, I'll always just vote on like what I think is the best, and base that on like the actual art of it rather than the feeling in the moment. That's partially why I think like Britt Baker versus Thunder Rosa is so high. Like I don't think it's necessarily the most incredible match, but it's one of these things where you just invested in it and it was so easy to get behind, and that's why I love that match so much, and that's why I'd always rank that one so highly. When in the grander scheme of things, there wasn't a title on the line, there wasn't a huge moment. There was obviously significance surrounding women's wrestling and stuff, but yeah, just wanted to like reiterate that. Like, I know I'm being very biased and like putting my subjectivity into it a lot. I want to make that clear, but yeah, I do think when people go back and rewatch it, it is one which I think it would stand up more than people think it does, if you get what I mean.
Well, look, I'm not going to say anything further because I think you've summed it up very well there.
Okay.
This is a great match. It's something that if you want to, it's only like 15, 16 minutes long. It is a sprint. It is a rollicking good time. Definitely worth a rewatch if you're keen to go back and relive just a moment of absolute united joy for wrestling fans. I think when crowds came back right across the spectrum of wrestling fans, it was just a time of utter joy and happiness. And this match was right at the center of that and one of the big high points for Double or Nothing 2021 for sure. I've got nothing further to add, Gareth. Do you have anything further to add? And if not, please tell the good people where they can find you.
No, I got nothing more to add. You can find me on Twitter at Gareth_EW. Although I'm gonna start pushing more on my at @Eno_wrestling account. I'm just gonna be doing more kind of. I've been thinking of. I won't explain it on the podcast. I'll explain it to you afterwards. But I want to bring more positivity, basically, to the wrestling community, and I want to do that on my basically, you can find me there. I'm going to be pushing out more stuff to do with like more positive and enjoyable, not necessarily just positive in a toxic way, but enjoyable tweets and eventually content when I get the time to do that as well on YouTube. And I'm going to do it on TikTok as well, but I haven't set any of that up yet, so this is pointless to tell you. But yeah, just go follow the at @Eno_wrestling account, or if you care about me personally, at Gareth_EW. But yeah.
And congratulations, you're the first person on this podcast to promote a TikTok, so good on you for that. I'm a 33-year-old dad. I ain't got no time for that shit. Twitter's enough. TikTok was the one where I realized I am definitely old because I have no interest in this new social media thing that's come up. I am fine just the way I am, thanks. I'll keep it the way I will. But you can find me I'd be interested to hear people's thoughts on where they would rank this match historically. So if you do have those thoughts, please hit me up on Twitter at @Sir_Samuel, or you can always email me, sambrownmedia@gmail.com. And as I said at the start of the program, if you have enjoyed what you've listened to here today, I would love it if you would rate or review on the podcast app that you're listening on, and you can support us financially, there's a link in the podcast description on how you can do that through Red Circle, either by an ongoing monthly donation or a once-off. And that just goes to paying the bills, mostly for hosting and some equipment if we need it. We're not making a mozza here or anything like that. It just goes to support that. And also, why not tell a friend? Tell a friend about this podcast. Invite them along. Tell them to have a listen. Find a match that we've reviewed here from AEW with their favorite wrestler in it, or that's their favorite match, and tell them to give it a listen and help. Let's help build this movement. It's been great to see the support that I have been getting and that the second list has got. It's been fantastic to see all that. But we'd love to have more of you along for this ride and keep building this great community we've got going. And with that, I will be out. We'll be back again next week for reviewing another great AEW match. And I cannot wait to do that. And I cannot wait to see you guys. Thank you, Gareth, for being on today. And thank you for listening. I'll see you again next week. Bye. Thanks for listening to the AEW Match Guide podcast. If you enjoyed the show, then you can subscribe on the podcast app of your choice so you never miss an episode. Also, feel free to let me know on Twitter at Sir_Samuel. I'd love to hear from you. The AEW Match Guide podcast is brought to you by the Social Suplex Podcast Network, where you can find many other fantastic podcasts discussing not just AEW, but all parts of the world of professional wrestling. Looking forward to seeing you again next week. I'm Sam Brown.
Tired of long waits and rushed care at the ER and urgent care clinic? Next time, stay home and let Dispatch Health bring the power of the hospital to you.
I call Dispatch Health. A care team of medical professionals actually come to your house.
They're the same caliber of people that you would see if you were at a hospital or an urgent care.
Dispatch Health can treat most non-life-threatening emergencies.
They can do the x-rays, they can do stitches.
Urinary tract infections, blood test, urinalysis, ultrasound.
It's almost everything that they can do at the ER.
You never feel rushed. They're there for you and only you.
I felt like their only patient.
And it costs no more than a trip to urgent care because Dispatch Health is covered by most insurance, including Medicare. See if we serve your home at dispatchhealth.com.
Dispatch Health really went above and beyond.
It's wonderful to have care come to your home.
House calls are back, and they're better than ever. Learn more at dispatchhealth.com.
Hey, it's me, your Uncle Cooper. Sorry to interrupt your music. I do love music, especially when it's set at a reasonable volume. You know, music is really only as good as your speakers. The same is true for minivans. A minivan is only as good as the tires it sits on. And the button on the screen there, it agrees with me. If you click on it, it'll bring you to all the Cooper minivan tires that'll make your minivan a really good minivan. Go with the Coopers! Cooper!